The call came at dawn, frost locking the ground, when a surveyor noticed disturbed snow behind a closed cannery, breath hanging as tape unspooled, radios quiet, evidence flags trembling, the stillness pressing like weight, telling investigators that winter had kept a secret, and December was done keeping it hidden long. If you like stories like this, make sure to subscribe and like the video. By the winter of 1980, Anchorage had learned to carry its grief quietly. Snow absorbed sound. Records rooms smelled of paper and heating oil. The victim's name was Laura Ann Whitmore, 22 years old, a retail clerk saving money for spring classes, last seen during the slow fade from Christmas to New Year. Her disappearance slipped between holidays when routines break and witnesses travel. The case would age with the season growing colder as calendars turned. Whitmore had arrived in Alaska from Oregon 2 years earlier, part of the late 70s pull north for wages and independence. She rented a basement room near Ship Creek, walked to work along plowed sidewalks, and mailed postcards home showing blue dusk and strings of lights. On December 27th, she clocked out early as snow thickened, telling coworkers she would cut through the industrial strip to catch a bus. She never reached it. The discovery came 3 days later behind the abandoned cannery off Whitney Road, a place known to dog walkers and municipal crews. Investigators documented footprints, tire impressions, and a scarf pressed into ice. The temperature hovered near zero, preserving traces but complicating interpretation. No overt signs of violence were visible. The scene suggested interruption, not spectacle. A life had stopped quietly. Autopsy findings, completed under fluorescent lights at the state lab, indicated hypothermia as the terminal mechanism, with blunt force injury consistent with a fall or strike occurring earlier. The timing placed death within hours of disappearance. There were no defensive injuries recorded. Toxicology was negative. The pathologist noted bruising patterns that required context, not conclusions. The report would be revisited for decades. Initial investigation followed standard procedure. Canvassing covered the cannery perimeter, bus routes, and bars hosting post-Christmas gatherings. Officers logged statements from coworkers, neighbors, and a former boyfriend back in Oregon. No single account aligned cleanly with the timeline. Weather erased some tracks. Holiday absences delayed follow-up. The local press printed a brief column beneath weather advisories and church notices. In January, missing person flyers faded on cork boards. The case file thickened with routine memos. Detectives requested vehicle logs from nearby businesses and checked license plates noted by a snowplow operator. Nothing held. Anchorage was growing and the industrial area changed hands. The cannery doors stayed locked. By spring, the file was marked inactive. The cold case designation came quietly. Evidence was boxed, sealed, and labeled with Whitmore's name. Photographs yellowed slightly. Tape degraded. The scarf remained in property, a simple knit with no distinctive fibers. For years, the case resurfaced only when new investigators trained on old files, or when anniversaries stirred brief calls to editors. The break began not with a confession but with paperwork. In 2008, Alaska's Department of Public Safety initiated a review of unsolved deaths involving industrial corridors. Digitization exposed overlaps. One name appeared repeatedly in logs near winter scenes: Daniel Reeves, a contract driver servicing warehouses, present on multiple nights with access to secured lots. Reeves had never been charged in any violent crime. His employment records showed seasonal work spikes around holidays. A traffic citation placed him within blocks of Whitney Road on December 27, 1979, a detail overlooked when paper files were separate. Investigators noted the alignment and requested permission to re-examine physical evidence using modern methods. The scarf, once unremarkable, yielded touch DNA from a knot tightened under stress. Advances allowed a partial profile. Reeves provided a sample after a lawful request tied to employment screening in an unrelated case. The match was not perfect but statistically significant. Investigators sought corroboration. Archived witness statements were reanalyzed. A municipal worker had mentioned a delivery truck idling near the cannery that night, dismissed as routine. Route sheets now showed Reeves assigned to a late run. Weather logs confirmed a pause consistent with idling. Phone records, preserved through billing archives, placed a call from Reeves's handset near the site, a brief connection during the window. Reconstruction focused on plausibility. Reeves knew the area, the shortcuts, the blind spots. Investigators theorized an encounter escalating during a ride offer amid worsening weather. The injuries matched a push or fall on ice, followed by abandonment. Hypothermia did the rest. The theory fit the evidence without excess. In 2019, prosecutors convened a grand jury. The presentation avoided dramatics. It relied on timelines, maps, and probabilities. Reeves was arrested in August, the news breaking softly in local papers, framed by fishing reports. He pleaded not guilty, then changed his plea after pretrial motions failed. The court accepted a plea to manslaughter, acknowledging recklessness rather than intent. Sentencing considered the decades past and the enduring harm. Reeves received a substantial term, with credit for time served on unrelated charges. Laura Ann Whitmore's family attended quietly, holding copies of the autopsy report they had memorized. Afterward, the file closed with signatures and dates. The cannery lot was redeveloped. Snow still falls in December, mooting sound. The record now holds a conclusion, imperfect but lawful. For Anchorage, the season carries one less unanswered question, and winter keeps fewer secrets. The review process that led to resolution followed strict evidentiary standards. Investigators documented chain of custody for every item, photographing seals and logging transfers. The scarf storage history was reconstructed to rebut contamination claims. Statistical testimony explained likelihood ratios in plain terms suitable for a jury accustomed to practical work and long winters. No shortcuts were taken, and no single piece stood alone. Media coverage remained restrained. Editors emphasized procedure over personality, noting how technology matured while patience endured. Holiday columns framed the arrest against memories of blizzards and black ice, reminding readers how many disappearances occur when schedules shift for Thanksgiving dinners and Christmas travel. The case became a lesson in timing rather than fear. Community response reflected age and memory. Older men who had worked the docks recalled the cannery's silence and the way trucks idled to keep engines warm. They read the coverage with folded newspapers, recognizing names and roads. Younger residents learned the history as context, not spectacle, understanding that safety improvements often follow loss. At sentencing, impact statements were submitted in writing. They described an unfinished life measured against decades of waiting. The judge referenced Alaska's climate, noting how exposure compounds harm without leaving obvious marks. The ruling stressed accountability grounded in evidence, not emotion, and closed with a directive to update the public record accurately. Records management completed the arc. Databases were amended. Cross-references corrected earlier assumptions. Training modules added the case as an example of how minor citations and overlooked logs can matter. The lesson emphasized humility in investigation and persistence beyond initial failure. Each December, the Whitmore file now carries a final notation. The anniversary passes with less uncertainty. There is no ceremony at the cannery site, only a street where trucks move and snow collects. The quiet aftermath is not relief, but order restored to paper and memory. The case underscores a reality familiar to those who have watched seasons repeat. Crimes committed without spectacle can evade attention, yet leave deep imprints. Resolution does not warm the past, but it clarifies it. In Alaska, clarity arrives slowly, like daylight after solstice, and holds when earned. Investigators closed the year by auditing remaining cold cases, a routine that aligns with budget cycles and winter schedules. The Whitmore resolution reinforced support for evidence retention funding and interagency data sharing. It also reminded patrol officers that brief observations, logged during storms and holiday shifts, can mature into decisive facts decades later. For Laura Ann Whitmore, the record now reads complete. Birth and death dates bracket a short life, but the narrative acknowledges responsibility and consequence. Her family returned to ordinary Decembers with a quieter weight. Anchorage moved forward as it does, with snow, files, and a measured confidence that diligence endures. The legal outcome stands without appeal, supported by documented evidence and transparent review. The community's shock faded into acceptance, not celebration. Closure arrived as paperwork finalized and calendars turned. In the end, the season that once concealed the truth became the frame that revealed it, and the case settled into history, solved, sober, and recorded. Years later, when snow quiets the roads before Christmas, the story circulates as a reminder. It speaks to method, patience, and lawful resolve. Nothing more is required. The archive closes. The winter holds. This account ends where it began, with careful attention and respect for facts. The remaining pages are blank by design, left for future diligence rather than conjecture, and for families who value truth without noise. Order returns quietly, marked by dates, initials, and a winter that finally releases its hold. Thereafter, by February of 1980, the Whitmore file rested among dozens of winter cases, each bound with string and indexed by date rather than promise. The department's rhythm slowed after New Year, when overtime receded and budgets reset. Investigators revisited notes under humming lights, mindful that early assumptions harden quickly. Laura Ann Whitmore's movements on December 27th were mapped again, step by step, measured against snowfall and bus intervals, an exercise in patience rather than revelation. Anchorage's industrial strip presented challenges common to northern towns. Roads were wide, lighting uneven, and businesses closed early during storms. The Cannery had been shuttered for months, its perimeter accessible through gaps in fencing created by drifts and neglect. Municipal records confirmed no alarms that night. The absence of noise complaints suggested nothing abrupt. The environment itself absorbed events. The missing person report filed by Whitmore's landlord listed routine details: height, weight, hair color, the clothes last seen, a sweater, jeans, boots suitable for slush. No purse recovered. Her bank activity showed a small withdrawal days earlier, nothing after. Credit inquiries yielded no leads. This normalcy, preserved in forms, underscored how disappearances often blend into ordinary life before crystallizing into cases. Witness canvassing expanded outward. Bus drivers recalled delays but no disturbance. A store clerk remembered Whitmore purchasing bread and soup earlier that afternoon, preparing for a quiet evening. Snowfall intensified after dusk, corroborated by meteorological logs. Visibility dropped. Plows ran late. These conditions narrowed opportunity windows without numbing actors. Investigators considered transient populations common to port cities. Seasonal workers arrived and departed with contracts, complicating identification. Employment rosters were requested from nearby warehouses. Names filled pages. Most were cleared through alibis tied to time cards or holiday travel. The process consumed weeks, then months. Each clearance another door closed without opening the right one. Evidence management adhered to standards of the era. Items were sealed in brown paper, labeled by hand. Photographs were printed and mounted. Negatives were stored separately. The scarf remained a question mark. Fiber analysis in 1980 yielded no matches to local inventories. Without a suspect, the item waited. As spring approached, the investigative team rotated assignments. New cases demanded attention. The Whitmore file received periodic review but no momentum. In June, the district attorney advised holding pending new evidence. The advice was procedural, not dismissive. Files do not solve themselves, but they must be ready. Years passed. Anchorage expanded. Roads were rerouted. The Cannery property changed ownership twice. Each change prompted a brief check for new information, always returning to the same quiet. The family called annually around Christmas, asking whether anything had moved. Detectives answered carefully, respecting hope without inflating it. The first significant change came with technology rather than testimony. In the early 2000s, statewide efforts to digitize records created searchable connections. A clerk flagged overlapping locations among unsolved cases. The pattern was subtle: industrial edges, winter nights, minimal witnesses. It suggested opportunity more than method. Daniel Reeves surfaced within this pattern because of logistics. His work required access after hours. Route sheets preserved by a defunct contractor survived in storage later scanned. They placed his vehicle near Whitney Road on several dates, including December 27th. At the time, such proximity meant little. Decades later, it meant reconsideration. Investigators approached the reevaluation cautiously. Confirmation bias was a known risk. They assembled an independent review panel to test assumptions. The panel agreed the proximity warranted inquiry but demanded corroboration. The scarf was re-examined with updated protocols. A partial DNA profile emerged from skin cells, insufficient alone but directional. Legal steps followed. Subpoenas were obtained for archived billing records. Telecommunications companies maintained backups longer than expected. A brief call from Reeves's handset appeared within the relevant cell sector during the window. Analysts emphasized limitations of early cellular data, noting coverage overlaps and margins of error. The data narrowed, not pinpointed. The case narrative was rebuilt chronologically. Reeves's route showed a pause inconsistent with deliveries, whether data suggested idling to prevent stalling. The Cannery offered cover from wind. Investigators proposed a scenario consistent with evidence without embellishment. A chance encounter. A decision. Consequences amplified by cold. Defense considerations were anticipated. Investigators documented every inference and alternative explanation. Could the DNA be secondary transfer? Possibly. Could the call data be incidental? Yes. The strength lay in convergence rather than certainty from any single strand. In 2018, prosecutors authorized a grand jury presentation. The timing reflected readiness, not pressure. The Whitmore family was notified before any public action. They were told what could be proven and what could not. Transparency governed expectations. The arrest in 2019 followed standard procedure. Reeves was taken into custody without incident. His age and health were noted. The charge reflected available proof. The press reported facts, avoiding speculation. Anchorage responded with measured surprise. Old names returned to print. Pretrial motions tested evidence admissibility. The court admitted the DNA with cautionary instruction. Records were authenticated. Experts explained cold exposure pathology, emphasizing how hypothermia can mask preceding injury. The explanation was clinical, grounding the narrative. Facing the weight of evidence, Reeves entered negotiations. The plea acknowledged recklessness leading to death. It spared the family a trial while preserving accountability. The court accepted after confirming voluntariness and factual basis. Sentencing considered deterrence and proportionality. The legal outcome closed the case in the eyes of the state. For investigators, closure meant documentation. Lessons were recorded. The importance of preserving mundane records was highlighted. Training incorporated the case as an example of convergence over time. The aftermath unfolded quietly. The Whitmore family held a small gathering during the next Christmas, marking the end of waiting rather than victory. Anchorage moved on, as communities do, absorbing the resolution into collective memory. Cold cases do not end with celebration. They end with files stamped and returned to shelves, now complete. The winter that once concealed the truth had yielded it through patience and method. The record stood firm, not dramatic but sufficient. This portion of the account reflects the middle years, when silence dominates and progress is measured in inches. It honors the process that respects facts over impulse. In Alaska, such respect is practical, shaped by weather and work. As calendars turned, the Whitmore case became an example cited without flourish. It reminded officers that December nights compress timelines and expand consequences. It reminded citizens that diligence persists beyond headlines. The story continued toward resolution with steadiness. Evidence spoke when technology allowed it. Procedures held. The season that framed the loss also framed the solution, completing a circle drawn in snow and ink. As proceedings advanced toward final disposition, attention turned to verification and restraint. Prosecutors assembled exhibits with an eye toward longevity, knowing appeals would scrutinize foundations. Every document was certified, every photograph traced to a negative, every transfer logged. The case did not hinge on drama but on coherence, the slow alignment of independent facts that pointed in one direction without forcing them. Forensic review deepened understanding of the original findings. The autopsy notes from 1980 were reread alongside contemporary standards. The blunt force injury, once ambiguous, was reframed as consistent with a sudden loss of balance on ice following a shove or abrupt movement. The absence of defensive injuries aligned with surprise rather than struggle. Hypothermia explained the lack of hemorrhage progression. These interpretations did not change the past, they clarified it. Environmental reconstruction added context. Engineers modeled wind chill and exposure time using archived weather data. The models indicated rapid heat loss within minutes, especially near the open structure of the cannery where wind tunneled. The conclusion supported a narrow window between injury and fatal exposure. The reconstruction avoided speculation, presenting ranges rather than absolutes. Investigators revisited Reeves's employment history with care. He had worked seasonal contracts that favored flexibility, allowing stops outside strict schedules. Supervisors from the period were interviewed where possible. Memories were imperfect but records held. A handwritten route sheet, preserved by chance, showed a notation consistent with a pause. The handwriting matched Reeves's personnel file. The notation alone proved nothing. Alongside other evidence, it mattered. Defense experts reviewed the same materials. Their reports acknowledged limitations without offering alternate explanations that fit the full timeline. The court weighed competing interpretations and found the state's presentation met the burden for the negotiated charge. The process was deliberate, reflecting respect for the seriousness of revisiting a decades-old death. The plea hearing was conducted without spectacle. The factual basis recited dates, locations, and conduct in neutral terms. The defendant affirmed understanding. The judge ensured the record reflected voluntariness. The hearing ended quickly, leaving little for reporters to embellish. Anchorage read the next morning's paper and folded it away. Sentencing submissions addressed harm and accountability. The state emphasized recklessness compounded by abandonment in extreme cold. The defense noted age, health, and the absence of prior violent convictions. The court balanced these factors within statutory bounds. The sentence imposed reflected both the gravity of the outcome and the realities of elapsed time. After sentencing, administrative tasks followed. Victim notification forms were completed. Property was inventoried for final disposition. The scarf, now a symbol of the case's endurance, was returned to the family with documentation. The family acknowledged receipt in writing, preferring quiet closure to ceremony. The community response remained subdued. Letters to editors focused on process and patience. Older residents recalled the Cannery's presence and the winter of 1979, when storms arrived early. Younger readers learned how cases can sleep until awakened by method. The tone avoided judgment, emphasizing learning. Institutional reflection continued. The department conducted an after-action review. It highlighted the value of digitization and interagency cooperation. It also noted how holiday staffing patterns can delay critical steps. Recommendations were practical. Prioritize canvassing before weather erases context, and preserve mundane records beyond minimum retention. The Whitmore case entered training curricula. Recruits studied how minor citations and route logs can converge decades later. The lesson was not to expect technology to save every case, but to prepare cases so technology can help when ready. The emphasis was on humility and thoroughness. The quiet aftermath extended beyond the courthouse. The Cannery site, redeveloped into light industrial use, bore no marker. Snow continued to collect along fences. Trucks idled in winter as they always had. Life resumed its patterns, carrying the knowledge without display. For the Whitmore family, closure did not erase loss. It organized it. Christmases were still marked by absence, but the absence no longer carried uncertainty. They spoke of Laura Ann Whitmore by name, with dates and facts settled. That settling mattered. Public records now reflect the resolution accurately. Databases list the case as solved, with notes on the plea and sentence. Cross-references correct earlier ambiguities. Researchers reviewing Alaska's cold cases will see a conclusion supported by documentation. The narrative of the case resists simplification. It is not a story of a clever trick or a dramatic confession. It is a story of records kept, whether endured and patience rewarded. It respects the reality that many answers arrive late, if at all. As years pass, the Whitmore case will be cited less often. That is appropriate. Its purpose has been served. It stands as evidence that lawful process can reach across time without compromising standards. It demonstrates restraint in storytelling, fidelity to fact, and care for those left behind. In December, when schedules loosen and nights lengthen, investigators still review old files. The Whitmore resolution encourages that habit. It reminds them that winter can preserve as much as it obscures, and that diligence, applied consistently, can recover what was once lost. The case's middle years, filled with waiting, are now understood as necessary. They allowed tools to mature and perspectives to sharpen. They prevented rash conclusions. In hindsight, the pace appears measured rather than slow. Nothing about the outcome invites celebration. It invites acknowledgement. A young woman's life ended, and responsibility was established through lawful means. The community absorbed the result and moved forward with a clearer record. This portion of the account emphasizes continuity. It shows how method carries a case from silence to resolution without altering its character. It honors the work done in offices and archives, far from cameras, during ordinary days. As the file returns to the shelf one final time, it does so with an ending attached. The winter that once held the truth releases it into order. The story proceeds toward its conclusion with steadiness, grounded in evidence and restraint, ready to be completed. The closing phase of the Whitmore case unfolded without ceremony, marked by routine entries in ledgers and the steady ticking of deadlines. Appeals windows opened and closed. Motions were filed and resolved. The sentence stood. In official terms, the matter was complete, yet the system required confirmation through time, ensuring that procedure had been satisfied and rights preserved. Only after this interval did the case truly settle. Administrative closure carried its own weight. Evidence inventories were finalized. Items not returned were disposed of according to statute, documented with photographs and signatures. Digital files were backed up and indexed for long-term retention. Paper folders were stamped and archived. Each action was mundane, but together they formed the quiet architecture of finality. Investigators who had inherited the file reflected privately on its arc. Many had not been born when Laura Ann Whitmore died. Their connection to the case was professional rather than personal, shaped by respect for process and an awareness of limits. They understood that success here did not imply mastery elsewhere. It simply affirmed that diligence, when sustained, can align with truth. The Whitmore family's response remained consistent with their character. They declined interviews beyond a brief written statement acknowledging the court's decision. The statement thanked investigators for persistence and asked for privacy during the holidays. It did not seek to define meaning beyond resolution. Newspapers printed it verbatim, respecting its restraint. Community memory adjusted gradually. The case receded from conversation, replaced by current concerns. Yet among older residents, it remained a reference point when discussing winter safety and the vulnerabilities created by storms. It reminded people that assistance offered in bad weather carries risk, and that caution is not cynicism but care. Within law enforcement, the case influenced policy in small but measurable ways. Training schedules accounted for holiday disruptions. Record retention policies were extended for certain categories. Interagency data sharing improved, recognizing that isolated facts often gain significance only when combined. None of these changes were attributed publicly to a single case, but they bore its imprint. The seasonal context remained inseparable from the narrative. Thanksgiving travel, Christmas schedules, and New Year transitions create gaps in attention. The Whitmore case illustrated how those gaps can be exploited by circumstance rather than intent. Investigators emphasized this in briefings, advising heightened awareness during periods of routine disruption. The environment itself played a role throughout. Alaska's cold preserved evidence while erasing context. Snow hid tracks but also slowed decay. Wind masked sound but left patterns on ice. These dualities shaped interpretation. The final analysis acknowledged them without assigning agency, recognizing nature as a constant factor rather than an antagonist. The legal record now presents a complete sequence: disappearance, discovery, investigation, dormancy, re-examination, resolution. Each stage is documented with dates and sources. Researchers reviewing the file will find no missing links, only acknowledged uncertainties addressed within lawful bounds. That completeness is the measure of success in such cases. For Laura Ann Whitmore, the official story is now stable. She is remembered as a young woman who came north seeking independence and work, whose life ended during a winter night, and whose case was resolved through method rather than chance. Her name appears correctly spelled in databases that once listed her incorrectly. Accuracy itself is a form of respect. The defendant's future is defined by the sentence imposed. Correctional records note the conviction and term. There is no further role for him in the narrative beyond accountability. The system does not seek to extract meaning from his actions, only to mark responsibility and enforce consequence. As years pass, the Whitmore case will be cited less frequently. That is appropriate. Its value lies not in repetition, but in quiet assurance that unresolved cases can still move toward order. It demonstrates that time does not necessarily defeat evidence if care is taken. The archive where the file now rests is temperature-controlled, far from the cold that once framed the events. Shelves hold thousands of cases, most resolved, some not. Each file represents a commitment to record and remember. The Whitmore file is no longer marked pending. It sits among those with conclusions. During winter briefings, supervisors sometimes reference the case obliquely, reminding staff that patience and thoroughness matter. They do not recount details. They emphasize habits. The lesson has been absorbed into practice, which is its intended destination. The quiet aftermath extends beyond institutions. Families affected by unresolved cases often watch such resolutions closely, measuring hope. The Whitmore outcome offered a tempered reassurance that persistence can yield answers, even late. It did not promise justice in every instance. It promised effort. In Anchorage, December continues to arrive with darkness and snow. Roads glisten. Engines idle. People adjust schedules and expectations. The landscape that once concealed a truth now holds it without display. There is no memorial at the Cannery site, no marker to draw attention. The absence of spectacle aligns with the case's character. The story's end does not seek to comfort through narrative flourish. It rests on facts verified and procedures followed. It acknowledges loss without embellishment. It closes the record without claiming restoration. When investigators speak of closure, they mean something precise. They mean that questions have been answered within the limits of evidence, that responsibility has been assigned lawfully, and that records reflect reality. Emotional closure is personal and varied. The system offers only its part. The Whitmore case reached that point. It moved from uncertainty to documentation, from silence to record. It did so over decades, through changes in technology and personnel, without abandoning standards. That continuity is its quiet achievement. As the final entries were made, a clerk dated the last form and initialed it. The action took seconds. It represented years. The file was returned to its place. The archive door closed softly. This account ends with that closure. It leaves behind a complete record and a community informed rather than inflamed. It honors a young woman by naming what happened to her and how it was addressed. It respects the audience by offering substance over sensation. Winter continues. The system endures. The case is solved.